Yeah, it was massively important because people coming out of depression, people wearing up to those days very staid colours, greys and browns, and then suddenly during the 60s the baby boomers arriving. Now they're young enough to go to work.
Is this after the war?
Oh yeah,
after the war days.
After the war days, obviously during the 50s and that it was still very, very conventional. And then the 60s, people, young people, obviously has got disposable incomes, so they've got money, and like all young people, they're looking for change, and fashion was a great way. Massive fashion icons come along in the early 60s, the Beatles being the typical one. They had longer hair, Beatle cut. So youth today following that, you know, they were massive in America, so now suddenly Britain is leading the fashion. It's not Paris anymore, it's Britain, with all the things that come with the pops. I would say music was the most important factor. Not the only factor, but the most important. So people would look to the songs, they could buy their songs, you know, people were getting transistor radios in those days, you know, so they could listen to their own music, youngsters, and these people, you know, become on the television now, television programs were filming, you know, these people, so people were mimicking their dress, you know, they were setting the fashions, people wanted to be like their idols, so they started dressing like their idols. Boys' hair was getting longer, girls' hairs were getting shorter, all the fashion trends that went with it. Well, we start with the rockers, so they had leather jackets and jeans. More scruffy is probably the wrong word, but they look like bikers.
Yeah.
Then you had the mod. They were definitely ones that were into fashion. So they would wear the smart clothes and the smart suits or jackets, or so they want to go out clubbing in the evenings. So dressed right for that. Rockers would still have like slicked hair, you know,
Okay.
like you would see on the film Grease or something, you know. Where the mods, like I said, longer hair, a softer look generally, you know, albeit an older generation will call them smart because they thought they had long hair. They obviously the young consider themselves smart looking with that. And one looked, I wouldn't say more aggressive, but one looked still working class lad. The other will try and emulate, you know, look, we're a bit now, you know, we're dressing smart, we can go places.
Yeah.
They never had disposable income like that before, so that fashion was aimed at the young, whereas before fashion was for a different class of people. Suddenly this fashion in the 60s now, the only class distinction was young or old. It was a definite fashion that suited young people, mini skirts, you know, stuff like that, that older people couldn't get away wearing. So I think the youth felt as though this is ours, this belongs to us. And whether you was rich or poor, you were dressing in the same, so you belong together. We're just all young people together. Well, during the 60s there was also equality, sexual equality for women. There was the pill, you know, they were looking to develop themselves, to be treated the same as men, you know. Jeans were now becoming a social wear and not work wear. Denim was socially accepted to wear. Girls were wearing jeans, boys were wearing jeans. As I mentioned to you before, you could see a couple walking down the street and looking from behind. They both could be in Levi jeans, both having the same style of hair, you know, and older people generally, oh, you can't tell them apart, which one's the boy, which one's the girl, you know.
Yeah.
What film stars, you know, they became iconic. Sporting icons, football icons, you know, in the 60s, you know, they would see their player on the terraces, and then afterwards, you know, when they're out, you know, and you see them on the TV, they'd be in fashion clothes, so they'd want to emulate their football idols, say. I think it was the first time they could, and they felt empowered with it. You know, it was exciting, it was something new, they considered theirs, and you know, and I think they embraced it wholeheartedly.
The man usually done the outside work, the gardening and all that kind of thing, and looked after the car. Well, the lady of the house brought up the family, the young family, and done all the usual domestic things. Well, the workplace was still men orientated. The women done all the menial jobs like office work and sorting all the paperwork out. The men usually worked on the big machines, the heavy work. Doctors, the hospital, the doctors were law. The nurses had to do as the doctor said, and it usually was the man had the upper hand. The wages were more for the men. The women didn't get very much. The men had the higher wage, and the ladies were very poorly paid. The wages were absolutely different, not like nowadays. There was a strike towards the end of the 1960s with one of the big car factories where the ladies demanded the same wage as the men, and they went out on strike, and they brought nearly the whole of the country on strike.
So was it quite effective?
The unions really did kick up about it. They were fighting against it, but the women won in the end. So we get more or less equal pay from nowadays.
Okay.
We were allowed to vote as what came in, but you usually voted for what the man stood for. No, there was no differential in you could vote Conservative and a man that voted Labour, you had to vote Labour for what the man stood for. Not really. I think there was maybe one or two lady politicians. The lady politician that was very, very forceful was Barbara Castle in the 1960s. She was very, very forceful lady. She was more like Margaret Thatcher was in the 1980s, 1970s. I can't remember how long she was in office. But no, there was not many lady politicians around. It just wasn't done for the ladies, for the women to go into politics. Women, young ladies have got more opportunities to go to university than they did in the 60s. It was unheard of for the young women to go to the university in the 60s. There's more opportunity for women in this age than there was in the 60s. Women are holding higher jobs than they did in the 60s. There's more inequality, yeah. Ladies are getting more say than we did in the 60s. Women got better prospects than we did in the 60s.
What it did was to encourage active scepticism about establishment organisations, establishment thinking. So it was overtly critical.
Okay.
I think in the 60s there was more of a statement about what was going on in the world. I hesitate to use the word quality because that's very contextual.
Okay.
I'd say it's different. As I said earlier, it's different in intent. I think in the end of the 60s, the music definitely and undoubtedly had an encoded message about change things. And if we look at music now, in 2014, again, my impression is, not being an ardent listener, my impression is that it's being used for a different intent. It's more of an entertainment intent rather than an informative call to change intent. So it's a medium